Hello and thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. I'm Mackailyn Johnson. Here are some of the headlines we're following right now. DNA testing is bringing long-awaited closure of the families of 3 cold case murder victims. More on the lab that made the discoveries possible in 2 minutes. Diagnosing concussions in small children can be a challenge, but a new scientific breakthrough is making it easier to identify kids who could suffer from the lasting effects of this traumatic brain injury. And the Queen of Christmas is making a special announcement. The details just ahead. But first, let's check in with meteorologist Nathan Scott. It looks like that rain it came and went really quick, but it's not enough of like what we needed right now.
Good Wednesday afternoon, Mackailyn. The rain that we saw on Monday certainly is having an impact on the burn bans across the state because burn bans have been lifted for locations to the north and west of Little Rock for the most part, but burn bans remain in place for the rest of the state. And we still have extreme risk of wildfires in the red, South Arkansas. A large part of central Arkansas is still under a high risk of those wildfires. The winds are still up at times. They're coming in from the northeast about 10 to as high as 20 miles per hour. So the fire risk for the next 7 days, we're going to keep it medium for Thursday, Friday, also into today. But then it drops for Saturday, and that's because rain returns to the forecast. In fact, Saturday could be quite a soggy day around central Arkansas, and that's some good news because we'll see a good soaking rain for a large part of the region, it looks like at this time. Temperatures are on the cool side. It's sweater weather. We're into the low to mid 60s across the region. Highs today topping out into the upper 60s, maybe some low 70s down to the south. I'll have more on that rain potential going into Halloween weekend coming up.
Thanks, Nathan. An East Arkansas man is arrested and charged after police say he faked his own kidnapping. West Helena police say 26-year-old Frederick Gamble posted on Facebook that he had been kidnapped yesterday morning. Police later found him at his girlfriend's house. He's now facing a long list of charges after reportedly trying to flee. The girlfriend is also charged with hindering apprehension. They're both due in court for a bond hearing today. Advanced DNA testing has now identified 3 cold case murder victims from the 80s and 90s. The Benton County Sheriff's Office says these 3 people were the only unidentified victims they had. Catherine Gilker with our Fort Smith affiliate shows us these new discoveries are helping give the victims' loved ones some sense of closure.
I can't be more proud than I am of the work that they've done to get us to the point that we now have no victims that are not identified.
For decades, 3 Benton County murder victims went unidentified. But now the Sheriff's Office has paired each with a name and a face.
We'll never stop when we have victims in these cases, and this is proof right here. And we're not done with some of these, and we hopefully will have conclusions on all these at some point very soon.
The victims' remains were sent to Othram, a private lab that specializes in analyzing DNA from trace amounts of degraded or contaminated materials. Lieutenant Hunter Petray says the lab developed DNA profiles and generated genealogical leads, meaning it identified potential family members and then they identified the victims themselves.
Cold cases are easy to be forgotten. They can go in a box on a shelf and nobody ever look at them again. Can't always solve a case, but my opinion is you can always at least try to move it forward. You know, and with DNA technology that's come about, it's just great.
The first victim identified is 33-year-old Fred James Grow. 5 News archive video shows the day he was found murdered in the Roberts Loop area of Garfield in June 1981.
The body was quite decayed down to the skeleton. It was still intact and still clothed.
Grow's body was exhumed from an unmarked grave in 2019 and sent to the state crime lab where they only developed a partial DNA profile. In July of this year, Othram discovered a possible identity, leading investigators to a relative who identified Grow after 41 years. 28-year-old Donna Sue Nelton's remains were found in Maysville in May of 1990. She had been shot and burned. Facial reconstruction couldn't be done because of extensive damage. Her remains were sent to Othram last April, and in August, the lab identified a relative who told investigators she had been missing since 1989. Investigators believe Nelton's killer was her boyfriend, who died in prison while serving time for another crime. The final victim is 31-year-old John Douglas Rollins, Jr. Here's an interview with the late Sheriff Andy Lee when his body was discovered in October 1996.
The fishermen discovered what appeared to be a body floating, and when we got up on shore, they determined it was that of human remains.
Benton County Prosecutor Nathan Smith says there is no statute of limitations on murder.
Generally, the longer a case goes, the more difficult it becomes for the state to charge it. But that's not to say that it couldn't be, right? If we had, evidence that came out today, we'd pursue it like any other case.
The two cases of the men who were murdered are still active investigations, and the sheriff's office is still hoping somebody out there has information that could help them crack these cases. Now, turning to a story we've been following for a couple of days, grief counselors are working on the campus of a St. Louis high school today. The counseling sessions come just 2 days after police say a 19-year-old gunman killed a student and teacher and wounded several others in a mass shooting. Authorities say they found a handwritten note in the gunman's car with a list of school shootings across the country, adding he wanted to be the next national school shooter.
He wrote, quote, "I don't have any friends. I don't have any family. I've never had a girlfriend. I've never had a social life. I've been an isolated loner my entire life. This was the perfect storm for a mass shooter."
With school shootings at a record high in 2022 by some estimates, this latest incident has renewed the contentious debate on gun control. Now, THV 11 is your election central, and today is day 3 of early voting. Counties in central Arkansas are seeing pretty good turnout after the first 2 days. Pulaski County seeing just over 11,000 early voters in those first 2 days. Now, there are 13 more days until Election Day is here on November 8th. Arkansas Secretary of State John Thurston says typically about half of people who vote do so early. And with several big items on the ballot, like the governor's seat and lots of high-profile ballot measures, he's expecting a big turnout this year.
And also, due to redistricting, all of the legislative seats are open and all the county seats are up this round. So there's a lot of, definitely a lot of races on the ballot.
Now, make sure to have an approved photo ID when you head to the polls. Many voting officials will be on hand to help at early voting sites, but there's one thing they cannot do.
The one thing we cannot do is we cannot explain what is on the ballot and what the issues mean, who the candidates are, who they represent.
Jennifer Price says this is why sample ballots are provided so that voters can review the issues and races before they head to the ballot box instead of relying on TV ads from competitors. Voting locations close at 6 p.m. this evening. And we're keeping you prepared as you gear up to head to the ballot box. When you decide to cast your ballot, you may notice even more eyes on you as you do. There are poll watchers there to make sure your vote is safe and counted. Both the Republican and Democratic parties of Arkansas say they're seeing more people interested in being a poll watcher because of election integrity. They both say the narrative of voter fraud and the mistrust that came from the 2020 election has led to a sparked interest. Sarah Reynolds with the Republican Party of Arkansas says they have hundreds of poll watchers across the natural state, and Josh Price with the Democratic Party says they too have similar numbers and they continue to grow.
There's been that bigger push to be educated in how to become a poll watcher, which is why we did a lot more trainings this time around.
More people are introduced to the system and they get to see it and see that it actually is a very well run and secure system.
Now, it's important to note these poll watchers are there on behalf of a candidate or a ballot issue. They are to simply observe procedures. And if you need a closer look at the races, issues, and candidates here in Arkansas before you cast your vote, THV 11 has you covered. You can find our comprehensive voter guide now on THV11.com. You can also text the word VOTE to 501-376-1111 and we'll send you the link. Now, outside of Arkansas, high-profile debates are taking place in several key races across the country, including in Pennsylvania last night, where Senate candidates John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz squared off. Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman and TV personality Dr. Mehmet Oz squared off in their one and only debate in their U.S. Senate race. For many voters, it was their first time seeing Fetterman since he suffered a stroke in May. Now, neither candidate held back from attacks, especially on the issue of crime, which is a key topic in the Keystone State.
John Fetterman, during this crime wave, has been trying to get as many murderers convicted and sentenced to life in prison out of jail as possible.
He has no experience. He has never made any attempt to try to address crime during his entire career, except showing up for photo ops here in Philadelphia.
All eyes are on the Keystone State race, which is considered a toss-up and is one of the races that will determine who controls the U.S. Senate. Just ahead, more on the respiratory virus affecting children all over the nation. Right now, what you need to know in your own home about this virus. But first, a quick check of our forecast with meteorologist Nathan Scott.
Mackailyn, we've got a beautiful blue October sky all across central Arkansas. It's going to feel like fall out there. Going to the weekend, though, changes arrive. It's good changes if you want rain, bad changes if you do have outdoor plans. I'll have that forecast coming up.